Welcome to Time Travellers Weekly, where every story is a journey into Britain's past. This week's edition takes us to Wiltshire in 1943. Let's begin. In the winter of 1943, the residents of a small English village were given an order that would change their lives forever. They had just 47 days to leave their homes. Families packed their belongings. Farmers left land their families had worked for generations. Doors were closed. Keys were handed over. And by Christmas, the village was empty. The residents believed their departure was temporary. They were helping the war effort, and when the fighting was over, they expected to come home. But more than 80 years later, they still haven't returned. This is the story of Imber, the village Britain gave to the army. Imber lies deep within Salisbury Plain in Wiltshire. Today, it is surrounded by one of Britain's largest military training areas. But before the Second World War, this was a living village. There were farms scattered across the surrounding countryside. There was a school, a Baptist chapel, the Bell Inn, and overlooking the village stood St Giles Church. For centuries, generations of families had lived and worked here. Imber was isolated, several miles from the nearest towns, and agriculture dominated village life. It was the sort of place where neighbours knew one another. Children attended the village school, and families could trace their connection to the surrounding land back through generations. But gradually, the landscape around Imber began to change. Towards the end of the 19th century, the British military began using parts of Salisbury Plain for training. Its huge areas of open countryside made it ideal for military exercises. In 1897, the War Office began purchasing land on the plain. Over the following decades, those purchases continued. Between 1927 and 1932, the War Office acquired substantial areas surrounding Imber, including much of the village itself. Many of Imber's residents were no longer simply living in their own village. They had become tenants of the military. At the time, this may not have seemed particularly significant. Life continued. People worked the farms, children went to school, services continued at St Giles's. But by the time Britain entered the Second World War in 1939, Imber was sitting in the middle of an increasingly important military landscape. And soon, the war would reach this quiet Wiltshire village. On the 1st of November 1943, the residents of Imber received devastating news. The War Office needed the village. Preparations were underway for the Allied invasion of mainland Europe, and the military required more land for training. Imber would have to be evacuated. The villagers were given just 47 days. Every man, woman and child had to leave by the 17th of December. Imagine receiving that order. Christmas was approaching, the country was at war, and suddenly you were being told that within a matter of weeks, the home you had known for years would no longer be yours. But Britain had already endured 4 years of war. Millions of people had made sacrifices, and many of Imber's residents appear to have seen leaving their village as another contribution to that effort. They believed they were helping their country prepare for the liberation of Europe. And crucially, many believed that when the war was over, they would be allowed to return. Over the following weeks, Imber slowly emptied. Possessions were packed. Livestock was moved. Families tried to find somewhere else to live. One by one, homes that had been occupied for generations fell silent. Perhaps the most poignant story from the evacuation concerns the village blacksmith, Albert Nash. Nash had worked as Imber's blacksmith for more than 40 years. According to accounts repeated in the years since, he was found at his forge, overcome with emotion at the prospect of leaving the village. For men like Nash, Imber wasn't simply an address. It was his work, his community, his history, his home. On the 17th of December 1943, the evacuation was complete. Imber was empty, just 8 days before Christmas. The villagers left behind a place they expected to see again. None of them could have known that they were witnessing the end of their community. Then came D-Day. On the 6th of June 1944, Allied forces landed on the beaches of Normandy. 11 months later, the war in Europe was over. Across Britain, servicemen returned home. Evacuees returned to cities. Families began rebuilding their lives. And the former residents of Imber waited to return to theirs. But the permission never came. The military still wanted Salisbury Plain for training. Imber remained inside the training area. The temporary evacuation was becoming permanent. Former residents campaigned for the right to return, but despite their efforts, Imber was retained by the military. The village they had left to help Britain win the war would never again become their home. As the decades passed, the Imber the villagers remembered began to disappear. Many of the old buildings vanished. Military training changed the landscape. Mock buildings were constructed for soldiers to practice fighting in built-up areas. Where families had once lived, soldiers now trained. Where children had once walked to school, military vehicles travelled through the village. But one remarkable link to the old Imber survived: St Giles Church. Standing above the village, the church dates largely from the 13th and 14th centuries, on the site of an even earlier church. Its walls had watched generations of Imber families being baptised, married and buried. And long after the houses around it had fallen silent, St Giles's remained. A church standing over a village without a congregation. Imber remains part of the Salisbury Plain military training area today. For most of the year, the public cannot simply drive into the village. Military warning signs surround the landscape. Access is tightly controlled. On limited occasions, however, the roads are opened and visitors are able to enter. For a few hours, people once again travel through Imber. They visit St Giles. They walk along the road. They look across the landscape and try to imagine the village that once stood here. But then the visitors leave. The roads close, and Imber becomes silent again. There is something particularly haunting about Imber, because the village was not destroyed by a natural disaster. It wasn't swallowed by a reservoir. It wasn't abandoned because its industry disappeared. Its residents didn't gradually drift away. A living community was deliberately emptied. And the people who walked away in December 1943 did so believing that their sacrifice was temporary. They were helping their country during one of the darkest periods in its history. They expected that one day they would walk back through those doors. That day never came. More than 80 years later, St Giles Church still stands above Salisbury Plain. The farms are gone. The school has gone. The families have gone. But the name remains. Imber. A village whose residents left their homes to help Britain win a war, and discovered that sometimes, even when the war is won, you don't get everything back. Thank you for travelling through history with Time Travellers Weekly. If you enjoyed this week's edition, subscribe so you don't miss the next journey into Britain's past. Until next time, safe travels.